So the first time I saw your work is when you did the Alien series, like I think it was for Dark Horse Comics.
Yes, sir.
And that's when I first noticed your stuff. It's like it was a step above, I thought, a lot of the comic stuff coming out. I mean, there's a wide variety. There are obviously some people that are amazing, like Bernie Wrightson or John
Hmm.
Tolibin or Steve Bissett, um, or Kaluta. There are a bunch of people I like, but there are also people that were like, "How did you get hired?" Like they must really need somebody that day. Maybe nobody was drawing. I don't know. You see some people that like you're like, dude, you don't even know basic anatomy, and you're doing superheroes and stuff. So let's start out with you. How'd you get started?
Well, I'm sort of like, I mean, I went and watched your interview with Steve, and
Okay.
I know Steve, and he's a good friend, and he followed the really traditional. He went to the Kubert school. He got it all right, in the beginning. I kind of come from another background, whereas I was a fine artist trained in printmaking, and I'd always done sort of comic book stories and interested in things like that. And then my wife finally said, "Why don't you do something with all that artwork that is underneath the bed, wedging the bed up?" So I started submitting, and I got into a little tiny local independent comic called Just Imagine. And from there, Joe Staten, who I have to say, is the one of the people that really is a brilliant man all the way around and a good art director. And he asked me if I'd be willing to ink Hilary Barta on Star Slayer, and that's where it kind of started. And then from there, I was inking Hillary, and then from there, that I went to doing Clone Zone in the backup of Nexus. I did a spoof on Godzilla, and Dark Horse saw it, and they asked me if I'd want to do some Godzilla covers, and I said sure. And then after the Godzilla covers, they kind of said, "Well, we have a secret project we're working on. We don't know if you'd be interested in it." And I said, "Well, what is it?" They said aliens, and I'm sort of like, "Nah, who wants to draw that crap?" I mean, no, I was like, yes. So I kind of got in through the back door, and then I just got lucky. I got teamed up with some good people. Inking Hillary was an absolute blast. From doing aliens, I got to ink a lot of other people. I worked at Eclipse Comics, which is no longer here, and I've inked people like oh
No, I
god,
remember Eclipse and
hmm
Malibu and
hmm
Caliber and all those people. They went under.
yeah, it's sad. It's kind of I have always had a great love for the independent guys. And the comics that I first started reading were, the monster stuff from Marvel, and then all the early DC kind of science fiction stuff. So
Oh
I have a
yeah,
big,
same here. Same here.
yeah.
Like Tales from the Crypt sort of stuff, like Swamp Thing. Like I like it way better than like Superman.
Well, and I mean, it's the kind of thing, in all honesty, and thank you for the compliment about my art. The thing is that, if someone said to me, "Do you want to sit down and draw a Superman book?" I'd probably go, "I don't know." And then they said, "But, he's fighting a monster with giant pimples." I say, "Count me in." So
Well, there
I
is that
kind of,
angle, yeah.
I've always been on that fringe, because in all honesty, I mean, I read a lot of superhero stuff too, but those guys, they do it, and that's their love. And that's what's really important to
Right.
me, is that you have to do what you love. So I've been lucky that I've, got to work with Clive Barker on the Hellraiser stuff, and worked with some great writers like Dan Chichester at Marvel. And so God, I got to ink Hellraiser. I got to ink Mike Mignola. I mean,
Yeah.
I've kind
He's
of,
amazing. I love his stuff.
oh yeah. I mean, the thing about Mike to me is that he does stuff that I can't do. And people always say, "Well, why do you like his work so much? Because it's so different than what you do." It's like Mike's attitude is, when I talked with him, was like, he tries to draw how little to get the most. So it's always interesting when I was inking him. It's like, it's not about adding surface texture and all the stuff that I love. It's what is absolutely necessary. So that was always kind of I've like I said, I've learned a lot from inking different people that I've worked on. And it's really, I mean, I got to ink Joe Staten too, which was a lot of fun. He's a great storyteller. Um,
I guess it kind of depends on the person too, because I mean,
mhm.
if it's like Alan Moore writing it and Steve Bissett and John Taliban, doing the art, then it could be Superman, it could be Batman, whatever.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the whole thing. If you get the hook, I mean, I did and it didn't get published, but I did a Green Lantern Corps story that I wrote with a Green Lantern character that was a giant ant. So that was kind of fun, and I really enjoyed that. But that, comic got, you know, snipped at one point and my
Right.
story went with it. So, I mean, there's
I
comics
know
to
there's
me.
a I know there's a lot of politics involved. So like even if it's a great story, it's like, somebody in the upper echelon, like maybe they didn't like ants that day or something.
Mhm. Well, I mean, I know like when we were working with Blood and Shadows, we started out at Vertigo with one editor. And then what happened was that, DC moved, did this, did that. Then Vertigo got taken over by somebody else and all this. So we were kind of like a little bit. So yeah, that does happen. And that's just, there's nothing you can do about that as the artist except, draw more and ink more and color more.
Right. Move on. Yeah, I'm sure
Yeah.
it's fine. All right, so let's go to what you're working on now, and then I want to like go back. But first I want to like make people aware of what you're doing now that they should look for.
Well, the nice thing, I mean, I have to admit, comics have changed so much since I came into the industry. But the whole thing of how do I want to say it, with Kickstarters and things like that, has allowed the artists and a lot of people to do things that they would like to do or personally do. So I'm working on a project right now, which is my own thing, which I'm writing, penciling, inking, coloring, and it's called Thunder Hunters. And if you go to my, on the Facebook page, I have a bunch of examples of it. But it's pretty much a story about an artist who is stuck on a foreign planet who is meeting different cultures in this area called Vermilion Sands, which is an uncharted area. So what he's doing is he's making drawings of the locals, the shamans, the royalty, and then he's telling stories of their myths and what happened to him in little short comic book sequential art things. So it's like there'll be some illustrations, and there'll be some comic book stories, a little more illustration, more stories. So I'm building sort of a book. The first one is laid
So it's
out.
like an illustrated book as opposed to like a straight up storyboard comic book.
Well, it yes and no. It's sort of hard because what you do is like, okay, it's going to open up and there'll be like some pictures of our character JV Holbrook walking around in Vermilion Sands, and you kind of get this idea of what he's seeing. And then the first little story is, called Bandits, which is opens up and there's a first page is like a sketchbook notebook page, and there's some of the little pre-drawings I do for the for the study of the characters. Then underneath it says Vermilion Sands is blah 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 tough area. There's bandits da 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 da. And then you go into a comic book story, which is 5 pages called Bandits. And then after you finish that, you're going to hit one called, then there's a little notebook page which says shamans, and then it talks about that. And then you have another story. And then, so yeah, it's a little bit of, it's like his travel log or journal through this world.
So you have kind of a texty script of every new scenario that he encounters.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, that's awesome. Yeah,
It's I'm
I was
sorry.
just I was gonna say what I do right now because originally I wanted to be a comic artist, and then
Mhm.
I was just predicting trap drawing superheroes. I interviewed DC Comics and stuff. I felt like that. So what I do now is illustrated books. Like I really miss that. I miss that look of like text with like some illustrations that really bring it to life.
It's, oh gosh, I wish I had something I could send you, but yeah, it's a little combination of both. But the thing that I've tried to do, and a lot of the stories are actually wordless, so they're all told by the visuals. And then I'm also working not in different styles, but different mediums. So one of the stories is done on gray paper with black and white pencil. One of the stories is like full, then another one is full color. Then another one is ink with cross hatching and doing different things. So I'm kind of just having a lot of fun playing with things that I like and doing things. Because, like, a lot of times when you get into a comic book, they have a certain, this is the way our book looks. You have to do this, and that's it. So I said, well, I draw in so many different ways. I draw with pencil, I draw with pen and ink, I draw on tone paper. So I said, I'm just going to start doing the strips that way too, the comic book stories in there. Well, I should use the good. See, if it's under $10.99, it's a comic book story. If it's over $10.99, it's sequential art. So, and my old drawing teacher always said, if it's under $9.99, it's a vase. If it's over $9.99, it's a vase. So, yeah, the sequential stuff. Some of it's silent, some of it has text. It's a lot of. For me, it's a project I want to do, and I'm going to do it my way. And so, if it flubs and dies, there's only one person I can blame. That's me.
But you're doing different expressions, like like one might be rendered like more in charcoal or watercolor or whatever. Another might
Yep.
be more in like line work. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
that's awesome. I don't see a lot of that. A lot of the experimentation, or when they do, is like one format. Like I really like Bill Sikocha's stuff, but like when he
Mm-hmm.
does his stuff, it's like it's his look for the entire book. So like that's cool that they're breaking up into like different outlooks. Do you
Well,
have one that you favor?
um, not really. I guess the thing was is that as I started writing the stories, I kept saying, what would be for me the best way to give you the visuals? You know what I'm saying? So sometimes I get in a hurry, I want to work just in pen and ink and crosshatch. Sometimes I like pen and ink and then I love to color it digitally. Sometimes I like just working in the pencil. So um, that's what I'm really trying to do is just take that range of media that we have as artists and apply it to the stories and try to bring out the best in the story with the media also.
Well, I've seen yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I've seen a lot of people nowadays like um well they use all different kind of formats to get across the same thing. Like they'll do the pencils and then they'll scan it in, they'll do the inks digitally. And I remember like back in the day before we could do that because I'm old. I remember we ink stuff with like pens or with brushes, and sometimes even quill pens.
Mm-hmm.
Is it what do you prefer?
Well, excuse me, itchy nose. I don't know what that means. Um,
We're all gonna die. That's what it means.
yeah, yeah, yeah. As my friend says, no one gets out alive.
Right. Well,
Um,
in the end, that's true.
yeah, but I'm like you in the sense of that I started very traditionally, and then I got into the computer. So for me, I use the computer to color, do tones, or do things like that. I still do all my original art on paper because I'm just faster. I've worked on that for so long. I'm just faster that way. And people say, well, use Procreate. And every time I sit down and try to use a computer program, I just don't get a feeling of the page when I'm drawing. So the paper gives me that. And then, like I say, you can scan it in. And like a lot of people will say, your pencils at times are so tight, you could just ink from those. So I can take those pencils, take them into the computer, make a few adjustments, and yeah, you can start coloring on them because the pencil line work is really tight. But then there's times my pencil work is a lot looser, and I do need to pull it together with ink. And my choice of tools that I like the most is still the brush, but there's just those days that I love working with the crow quill, and as you say, the ink and pen and nib. Um, I used to just all use brush, but what happened was is I developed a decibel notch, so there's certain sounds I don't hear anymore, which is bad. But I don't hear that scritching sound that the pen makes. So now I can use the crow quill more, and I really enjoy it because I go, Great. I don't hear that horrible scritching
So
sound.
that bothered you back in the day. So that's a large
Yeah.
thing that prevented you from using it.
Yeah. Yeah. So there you go. Um, and then also because I'm sort of a printmaker, or I did printmaking for years and years, and there's a difference between lithography and intaglio or etching. And with the etching, you're working with a scribe or a needle and you're scoring through the grounds and you get a very fine, like Rembrandt line, right? Okay, so now when you work in lithography, it's more like straight drawing, whereas you are sitting there and you're drawing with a grease pencil, which gives you that quality. So I think that's the whole thing for me is I've always, since I did etchings and lithos, so when I do some of my pen and ink stuff, I don't mind the crow quill or the brush, which gives you that sort of etching like severe line. But then I also love working on the gray paper or just regular paper with a black non-reflective pencil and creating something that has a whole different kind of feeling for shading and volume.
Okay. Let me ask you a couple more questions about your process. Like I remember, like it's hugely influenced, like I'm sure a lot of people were by Bernie Wrightson stuff. And when he did all the Frankenstein stuff, I thought, well, he must have done all that in brush. Actually, he did a lot of that in pen. That's probably he got like so much texture and so much fluidity with pens. So I always found them to be a little bit more stiff. So I actually I felt like I graduated when I moved from pen to brush, but he did some amazing stuff with pen.
Well, because if you look at the one of the heavy influences on Bernie and the Frankenstein stuff was Franklin Booth. Franklin Booth is a turn of the century illustrator who he did work in pen and ink, you know, but what he was looking at as a young artist was that all these woodcuts were being done and running the papers, and he thought they were ink drawings. So he kind of emulated an old woodcut process in his drawings, and that created the kind of look that he had, which then obviously, because I'm a huge Franklin Booth fan, and I'm a huge Bernie Wrightson fan. So it's kind of fun. We've all been influenced by some of the same people and how they, drew and the people they were looking at. And usually when I do get together with my artist friends, I always talk about, have you found anybody new that you like? Is there any new art coming out that you're excited about, or who are your influences? And it's so much fun to see and learn of new people that I haven't heard before and things like that.
Well, is there anybody new on the scene that you want to give a shout out to? Because like I knew a lot of the classics, and a lot of it seems like a
Mm-hmm.
lot of people haven't paid attention to them. Like I love Barry Windsor Smith stuff. I like Kaluda's stuff. I like Bernie Wrightson stuff, and Al Williamson stuff. But like a lot
All
of those people, it seems like they kind of like people don't know them as well.
Yeah, they're all. I was fortunate to meet Al a couple of times, and he was a genius and a really warm man. Michael Kaluta, I've met a couple of times, and he's the same way. We always had great conversations talking about art. He's a genius. All those guys that you mentioned, I only got to meet Bernie once for about 10 minutes. And that was, again, he is a super genius. And the other guys you're mentioning, they're all really wonderful classic comic book, illustrators. Um, I'm leaning a lot into some of the foreign stuff, which would be, over in Europe. And there's a book by Ralph Myers called The Undertaker, which is just a gorgeous drawing book. It has a lot of the same kind of feel of Mobius with his blueberry stuff in the Westerns. Alberto Vargas is working with Oliver Ateen, and they did a book called La Morte, which is just brilliant. I love Oliver Ateen's work. He did some work with Barron on a couple Star Wars books. And I also like Dieter Casagran, and his work is pretty incredible. And he actually did a Conan book, which has been reprinted. And there's just, and Popeye Cromwell, he just goes by Popeye now. He used to go by Cromwell. And they did a lot of stuff in heavy metal with his stuff. His stuff is so energetic and full of life. It's, there are so many good people out there doing different things. And I think some of the presses like Magnetic Press and now I'm sorry, the other one is slipping my old cranium.
Mhm.
They're reprinting some of that stuff, and it's really beautiful. So when I go to the comic book store, I'm always rummaging through, the comics, and then I'm always rummaging through the books and what the new stuff is. And the store that I used to go to a lot, the manager knew me and would just be, say, okay, do you want this, this, and this? And he'd have this whole, and then she left, and ah, I feel kind of bad, but I have another manager that's a good friend, and he's always pointing me into new ways and new things. Another guy is Sergei Topio, who is an Italian, and his work is really energetic and unbelievably beautiful. Um, but that's not to say there aren't good people, coming around. Mike Perkins, who just did I think, yeah, it is Perkins. I get that. I get this right. That just did the new Swamp Thing stuff was just his stuff was great. There and Sienkiewicz is always, you give him I don't know, a dead squirrel tied to a stick and he'll come back. He'll come back with Mona Lisa, I mean, he's just an incredible artist that way. Um, I'm trying to
But
think of okay, I'm sorry.
yeah, I was gonna ask. It seems like comics are kind of like they're kind of a dying format, and they came back a little bit, kind of like vinyl came back for the hipsters. I'm not saying comics are hipsters. I'm just saying, although it is cooler to be like a comic nerd now than it used to be. Uh,
Yeah.
but like I remember the comics, like when I talked to DC Comics, I interviewed with Andrew Helfer, and like I remember comics were like on the last legs. It was like the movies that saved them.
Well, the thing about it is that if I have to make a personal, uh, you know, and this is weird for me because I used to do a lot more comic book work, and then for about 10 years I went into video games. And actually, if you think about it, the video games is in direct competition with the comic book because the comic book is a form of storytelling, and it used to be able to take you to places no one else could. When I was reading the early Fantastic Fours by Kirby, there wasn't all the special effects and CG. When you'd watch a monster movie, it was a guy in a rubber suit with a zipper, and half the time you could see the zippers. Now we have, when you look at Guardians of the Galaxy, they've taken a lot of that imagery that Kirby created way back when and have just built on that and have created incredible things with CGI. So the comic book is fighting for the entertainment dollar of video games, and if you think about it, with the video game, you get sight, sound, movement, you get everything, so there's the thing, on the comic
Which
book
you
going,
didn't used to have that. Like it used to
no,
be like way more basic, and then I think video games and books would help like flesh out the stories, so people were more interested in the simpler video game.
yeah. And it has sound and music and everything else. I mean, like you don't open up your comic book and it goes do 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 do.
You never
Ta-da,
know. Maybe in the future,
yeah,
maybe that's coming.
that would be great. Well, the one thing about comic books for me is that it's a storytelling medium that I love. It
Okay.
allows you to tell stories, and single illustrations tell a story. But the comic book has got that sort of sequential movement, which I think is really nice. Now, yes, do I love movies? I love movies, and I love the sequential feeling of a movie, and that always affects how I put my stories and my comic books together. So,
But you
it
can tell
is,
so much more and break so many more boundaries with like comic books or books. Like I remember I read Lock and Key, and Lock and Key, like I like the series, but the comics are way better than the series.
huh? Well, I'll tell you, in all honesty, Lock and Key, the artist. Oh, and now his name fell out of my head. He is a genius. He's just unbelievably good stuff. He's done some other. He did an Island of Dr. Moreau, in which I would say if you can find that, get it. It is just so beautifully drawn. That guy is just unbelievable to me. Mm. So yeah, when most people go, well, what comic books are you reading? I actually kind of hate to say it. I'm more like, no, what comics am I looking at? Because I fall in love. If I have a bad story and good art, I'm okay. if I have bad art and a really good story, it's just hard for me to get through. So I'm more of an artist looking at the artwork than, somebody that has to have complete runs of things or this or that.
Yeah, I can think like if the art's by like Barry Windsor Smith, but the story is very mediocre, I can still, I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
dude, the art is amazing. I can take it. If the story is written by like Alan Moore, but it's like some crappy artist, I can take it as it's Alan Moore. So I can take it either way. But I think like in high school, like I debated whether I wanted to be an artist or a writer, and then I read Watchmen, and I was like, oh, you can do both. And I know he has like a very tight format, and I've talked to other people like Walter Simonson and stuff, and they said, "Yeah, I couldn't operate under that format." And there were some people like I think that Steve Bissett had problems, in the early like they had conflict in the early days because like he told me that when he looks at the comic page, he just wants to destroy it. And Alan Moore would like draw these very complex, like he would do like pre-drawings of everything, like this is where I want the character to be. I want to be looking at this angle. Like I know with Watchmen, he even made like a little model of Manhattan so he could position everybody on it.
Well, I know that another writer that I worked with, Mike Barron, at the time I was working with him, and I know he did it for Nexus and he did it for Clone Zone, but he would just make little drawings of the page. Then he'd write the word balloons all along the side. But he always said, if you can find a better way of doing it and making it more exciting, go ahead. This is just sort of a rough for you to see what I'm thinking. And
Okay.
that's sort of how I work. When I sit down and start working on a story, I work it up in those little formats and then add the word, little format, which is about that big, and then add the words on the side and doing that kind of stuff. So I learned from him with that. And yeah, when I worked with Mark Verheiden on Aliens, he was full script like Alan Moore, describing the scene, setting up the scenario. These characters are doing this, I kind of like this, point of view down or up once in a while. But he pretty much let me go with a lot of the stuff there. And when I worked with Chichester at Marvel, um, he really gave me the Marvel format, which is like page, 1 through 5. We're introduced to the character, we're in a jungle. The character has to sort of find this and this and this and do that. And then page 6 through 10, we have the obligatory meeting and the characters are doing this and this. And then you pretty much worked out the story and worked out that kind of stuff. And then the writer came in at the end and you worked out the story visually because Dan had given me the skeleton in words and then I filled it all out. And then he came back in and did the final text. So everybody works very differently. And I think sometimes if you get too much restraint, you have to figure out how can you work within those limitations to create what you want to do. And then sometimes if you have no restraints, you can get lost in the chaos of the art. So
Yeah, I remember Walter Simonson was telling me because I always thought stuff looked like very dynamic and very like it was like jumping off the page. And I remember what he used to do is he used to draw these little thumbnails and then he'd like put them on like a projector and then like project it on paper and go,
mm-hmm.
okay, that's the flow I want. Like it makes sense to this tiny size, so I capture the dynamism right there, and then I can fully detail a large page. Do you do anything like that?
All the time. I mean, well, let me just do this. I think, Simonson is another guy who's just an amazing artist to me and does his whole new Ragnarok thing is absolutely gorgeous. But that's the kind of thing I do tight little pencils that, are about 8.5 by 11 and do the layout and do that. And then I blow them up and then I usually retrace them down and then ink them or I adjust them in the computer, print it out and ink that. So there's a lot of things that the computer has allowed me to work differently. And that's why I hate to say it. I mean, most people like, I work the same way, A, B, C, D, E, F, but sometimes I'm A, G, M, Q, V. I work different with the mood that kind of strikes me a little bit. So
It
sometimes I
probably
do.
whatever you feel better fits the format of what you're. Yeah.
Yep. because sometimes you feel, I feel more loose and I want to be more energetic, so I'll draw a certain way. Sometimes I want to be tighter, so I draw a different way. And when I was teaching, I would always tell the students, when I pencil for ink, it's different than penciling for doing pencil, because with pencil, like, like with you can feather to a really soft gray. Well, ink, the line is black or white. So you really don't have that feathering. I mean, you can do it with washes, but when I was doing comics earlier on, we couldn't do that stuff because the stat camera wouldn't read it right.
Right.
So nowadays with the computer, it's allowed me to do stuff that I have always wanted to do, and with color and things. So it's been an incredible tool. I love it.
Well, it might be a big problem. I'm sure it was back in the day. It might be less of a problem now. But like, you have to be like, you can't be too detailed, especially with some inkers. Like I remember Andrew Helfer telling me that like he's like, your pencils are too detailed for most inkers. I was like, oh, I'll ink them, and he's like, no, 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 no. So because I know they're concerned about a certain number of pages coming out every month and all that. But is that a big concern about like the inker, or you actually know who's going to ink ahead of time, and you kind of like format it towards what they do?
I've only been inked by a couple people, so I really can't say much to that. But the one thing I will say, because I did work with Mr. Helfer also, at DC, and that was fun. But every editor has their opinions, and how things work. And it's just like every artist, like let's say someone says, oh, you need to work on anatomy. Well, if I look at Alex Toth and I look at some of these people, even Mike, Mike has a good understanding of anatomy, but his style, he twists and bends it to achieve what he wants. The same thing that Toth did. So I can't use that barometer always to say this is, why, da 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 is good or that's bad. And it's just like anything else. There's a lot of people that I've worked with that they want a certain look because that's what they like, and they push you towards that. But then there's other editors that have just said to me, have fun. And they just let me do what I want to do. And
yeah, probably that freedom is great because you're the artist, so you would know the best.
Well, I mean, the thing that I always sort of think about is that, okay, you're working on. I worked a lot for TSR, the Dungeons and Dragons people, and I've done WotC, the magic cards and things. But they're coming at you because you're an artist and you can do certain things. But when they start going, and they keep pulling in and in and in, it kind of destroys sometimes that creativity that you can bring to it.
Like trying to micromanage what you do.
Yeah. And that's the whole thing I always go, like you hire me, and I'll tell you a little story that I always thought was funny. It's like, I was working at a video game company, and they hired Bram to paint the cover for the video game box. And we're all like, yeah, this is going to be great. And then the company had Bram paint a bunch of rocks, and that was what the cover was. And you're kind of like going, that's kind of like getting Frank Frazetta and saying, hey, Frank, we need you to paint some juicy fruit gum,
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
it's just like, I don't get, so artists are, we always face different things, and you have everything. I know that even editors that are working at the book publishers, the art director has to take his or her, the job that they hired the artist to do up to the next level, and then they make comments, which then they have to bring it back down. And it's just, it's sort of a giant maze of people that look at your work. And I remember I worked on a La Morte de Arthur, a book on the death of Arthur, and the illustrations were about that big. They were like 4 by 4 inches, and I had 8 different editors that had to look at them, and I got like a page and a half on each drawing of what had to be changed. Move the horse head 1/4 of an inch this way. Move this way. Add this to this. make
The whole
this
thing
do
is
it.
digital. You could just like type it in
Yeah.
Photoshop and just move the head. Yeah.
Yeah. Not and back when I was doing it, it's like, oh God, I had to go in there and erase everything and try and move it. And it was, yeah. So,
No, I've had
and
that problem with the album covers. But they say, "Can you just turn the head a little bit?" I'm like, "Dude, it's an oil painting. I have to repaint the entire face." And then half the time they go, "Hey, I liked it better the first way." You're like, "Dude."
well, I worked with one guy and he made me do on one little painting, he made me do, it was digital, made me do 17 rounds of changes. And when we got done and I turned in the last one, he goes, "Oh, this really looks like what you originally turned in." And I just bit my tongue and I said, "Really?" Like, uh, so there are times when you can just say that it does become a very convoluted process. But then I was working with one art director at FASA, and that was Jim Nelson, and he just went, "Have fun." That
Yeah.
was his art direction. Or design a nature spirit, send me the pencils. And so you get both. So that's why I'm always kind of saying is that when you talk to different editors and when you talk to different people, you're always going to get their world of what, they're looking for and trying to create is different from each other. It's not really consistent, because even when you look at it, I mean, look at the difference when I first started reading comics. You had Kirby, Ditko, you had Wally Wood, you had all these different people that drew very differently. And now with DC being more under the thumb of Warner, it's looking a little bit more corporate. So there's kind of a style, that they want to promote and push. So
Yeah, I don't know if people like Bill Sienkiewicz could have made it in that environment with like his like really different but amazing style.
yeah, well, when I get in too many discussions about this, I said to someone once, if Jack Kirby walked into Marvel right now with his portfolio, he would not get work. And they would do, well, what's this anatomy, Jack? These big flat fingers or this and that, and these guys leaping around, and the character changes size and proportion sometimes through your whole book. You
Was
know,
he also doing like 6 comics at one time?
from what I've heard, and I really don't know. I mean, I love the man's artwork. I mean, he just did such incredible stuff, and I love his monster work. And I've just Taschen just put out a big book on the early Fantastic Fours, which was a birthday present to me. And man, it's so much fun to go back and read that stuff with his storytelling and all that. But I heard he could do up to about 3 pages a day penciling, which is incredible to me. But, I mean, the man worked on 100 issues of the Fantastic Four. That's unbelievable. Now you can't get somebody to do a story arc of 10 issues before
Right.
they're having a gripper, or the editor or the comic book company throws them out and gets somebody new.
Right.
So
Also, it does take them way longer. Like, I know that was one of Talbot's big problems. Is like he did these amazingly detailed images, but it took him longer than the 24 days or whatever they would give him to do it. So like they'd
yeah.
have to get like Rick Veitch or somebody else to do some other late, probably the last minute too.
Well, the one thing that I have to admit, and I think, I mean, we're so conscious in America of a monthly book. When you go to Europe, these guys will do a 52-page book and they'll come out, that's a year's worth of work for them,
When
which
it'll come
here
out when
would
it
be,
comes out. Yeah.
yeah, would be 2 issues.
Right.
So they have a real different attitude about it. The other thing I was going to say, another comic that I just loved recently is called Kong Crew. And
Okay.
that's a great, look that up. That's a great little book. It takes place in like a New York City that's all covered in jungle, and there's the giant Kong and dinosaurs, and it's absolutely. And Eric, I'm sorry, I just cannot pronounce your last name. It's like Heigl, but brilliant stuff. Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant work. I've fallen in love with that. So again, it's just that whole thing that I think everybody can sort of find a little niche to survive now. And with Kickstarter and with that kind of stuff, yeah, you're not hitting the 100,000 copies that, X-Men or those things hit, but you can find a good audience so you can keep making your work and keep doing what you really do love, and you can make a living out of it, I think, too.
Do you think there's a lot more freedom like in the independents? Like I remember I did an album cover for a band that was on a fairly large label and they were
Hmm.
called Zombie Apocalypse. And so I said, what should I do? And they said, anything you want. And then I did, and they go, oh, that's too horrifying. Nobody will buy our album. You know, I feel like
Yeah,
if they're on a smaller label, you have a lot more leeway.
I think so too, and I think that a lot of cases, what you've got is, like we said, you've got that whole tier. You got the art director. The art director has a boss. This guy has a boss, and then there's a boss there. So it's always like it has to go through all those people before it can be approved. Whereas sometimes, if excuse me, if they're a small band, or like when I was doing the stuff for Just Imagine, I pretty much say, "This is what I'm thinking about doing," and they go, "Great, go for it," and I just did it. Because it was just one person that had to say yes or no. I mean, even at Dark Horse when I was there and working on the alien stuff, it was Mark and I were doing, he was writing, I was doing the story, and then I would send in the pencils or the finished inks to Randy, who, would approve what we'd done. And then he would have to send it on to 20th Century Fox, and then they would go through it all and make their changes if they, and I have to admit, I was pretty lucky that on a 6-issue series, I only had to make like about 3 changes.
So you didn't have to redraw whole pages all the
No,
time.
no, no.
Yeah, I've heard
And half the
nightmare
time,
stories. Yeah.
it would just be like, change this face, or we can't use that person, or we can't. So it
Right.
was actually pretty simple stuff. So I was pretty lucky that way.
No, I've
So
heard nightmare stories where like they'll do it, and then it goes to the editor and he says change it, and it goes to the writer and he says change it, and then then they have to look, and when they finally prove it, then it goes through the inker. But yeah,
yeah,
they have to redraw it like 2 times just for the same page.
it's, I haven't had much of that, but I know people like you said that have, and I think sometimes I think it also has to be, a trust factor, because when you think about, we'll talk about, I mean, Total Bine's inks on Steve are just amazing. They're absolutely stunning things. I mean, and it did take them longer. And nowadays, the thing is that what they could do is say, okay, we'll do a, limited arc with Total Bine and Bissett of 10 issues or 6 or whatever. But we'll put this over here. And then you get someone that makes that monthly schedule that can do it, and let them, continue with the monthly book and then put out the special limited series. So there's a lot of different ways they can work around it. And it is tough because when you think of the amount of work that Total Bine and Steve did, and then you compare that against some of the other artists who were very minimal, and don't draw very much, but yet they're getting paid the same amount of money too. It's, it's that really that love factor of what you're trying to
Yeah,
do. And I
passion.
wish,
Yeah.
yeah, I wish the industry would pay more attention to that, but they really can't, because they've got printing schedules they have to meet, with their printers. They
Right.
got to make sure that, and it really is it's a long pipeline, because you got the writer, you got the penciler, you got the inker, you got the letterer, you got the colorist, and then you got the press run, you got shipping and delivering, and then you have the fans who, if the comic comes out too late, they're sort of like the Frankenstein villagers, ah, I have to have it now, and they're storming Marvel's offices. Why is this book late? Blah blah blah. But again, I can tell you stories that are good stories. I can tell you bad stories. We all have things that we've run into.
Yeah, I think that one of the early problems with like Image Comics was just the regularity of their books coming out. Like people were like they really wanted to see it, but it was like some would take forever to get out there. And, they had a lot of problems with distribution stuff. They're also fighting a lot of that was more dominated by the big companies than I feel like. You know better
Yeah.
than I do.
Well, no, I mean, it's just like anything else. I mean, if you talk to each one of those image guys, if you talk to Silvestri versus Valentino versus McFarlane, you're going to get all these different stories. Now, the thing about it to me is that McFarlane, I think, was one of the few that got the monthly book done. He was into that. He produced it monthly because he knew business wise that's what you needed to do. But I do think that sometimes, if you think about it, it was also at a time with that huge independent boom where you were
Right.
making all of a sudden all this money. So they put out, one issue and they make twice what they used to make for a year of penciling and inking or whatever in one book. So that's going to slow you down sometimes because you're like going, wow, I got
I
to
don't
spend
have to
some
work as
money.
hard. Yeah.
Yeah. And, so I don't know, I mean, they all have, and you hear these stories and they're all either watered down or they're different things. And everyone's got their own point of view, which is fine. And you got to take that with a big grain of salt. But, I mean, Image to me is, they were a very important thing to move back the independents and give them kind of the weight. And they're now doing what a lot of the companies, used to do, because a lot of the other independents now that I'm looking at are dealing with licensed properties. They want to do the RoboCop comic or the
That's where the
Predator
money
comic.
is, I take it.
Yeah, because they know that they've got a little bit more of a marketplace there. I mean,
Right.
and the American people were like that. I mean, you're going to buy a Nike tennis shoe before you buy Sir John's running bump-a-lots.
Yeah.
So because
Good running
it's got a brand name, and I think that's what Disney really plays off of. Because I've seen a lot of brilliant animated movies that were not Disney, but the American public goes, well, it's not Disney, so it's not good.
Right.
So, you're fighting against that kind of stuff. You're fighting against different things. And I mean, it is the kind of thing that, I mean, I can't tell you how many times people said, well, if you were to draw a Batman story, you'd be famous, and it's just like, yes and no.
Well,
I've
also
done,
a lot of people have drawn Batman too.
yeah,
You know.
yeah. So again, it's that whole thing. Do you want to, like I said, I'm doing Thunder Hunters, which is sort of my idea and things I love to draw, beasties, creatures, all this kind of strange stuff. It's not superhero. It's not this, but it's something that I love. But, I
That's what
can't
you're putting
vote.
out now right now, Thunder Hunters.
Yeah.
And
That's,
how can people find that?
um, well, right now it's kind of an etherical ghost. But what they can do is if they go to Facebook and they type in either my name or Grazing Dinosaur Press, I'm posting a lot of the artwork. And I'm also on Instagram under Grazing Dinosaur Press. And I post a
Yeah.
lot of the artwork and the things I'm working on. So that's been kind of fun. So I've gotten some good feedback on Facebook from people.
That's probably the good thing about social media. You can like post your uploads and like your
Hmm.
progress reports and stuff like that. I feel like back in I mean, this makes me sound old. This dates me, but I remember like Concrete coming out and Cerebus and all
Hmm.
this stuff. There was like amazing independent stuff that people actually bought. I mean, there were also like comic shops you could go and you could buy them from them. But is that still really going out? Because I don't see that nearly as much.
Well, I think again it depends on your comic book store. Some of them are more dealing with the big guys, and some of them are pushing the independents. Now, the comic book store down here that I do most that I love is Bedrock, and they get all sorts of great stuff. And the one of the managers is sort of a liaison with Aftershock, so they carry all the Aftershock books, and Boom, they carry Archaea, they carry all this kind of stuff, like Mouse Guard and that, which I couldn't always find sometimes, but they're really a great, eclectic comic book shop, and they're huge, so they got one huge store, and then they've got their little ones, but. I made friends with the manager of one of the little ones, and she knows what I like, and she's always pulling out different stuff from previews. And I mean, when you think of what they order from previews, and if you've seen previews, right? It's about that thick.
Yeah.
That's 1 month. And you're like just thinking, oh my goodness gracious. Do you want tuna fish or spotted tuna fish, striped tuna fish, checkerboard tuna fish? You know, blah, 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 blah. And so sometimes I can go through all that and I find stuff. So it's like anything else. I'm one step further removed. When I was growing up, the way you found a comic book store is there were none, and I grew up in North. No, I grew up in North Dakota, and my friend and I would get on our bikes and we'd pedal over to the Valley Dairy or the local grocery store, and they had the spinner racks with all the comics in them, and that's how you got comics. And it wasn't until I was in the 70s that, you know, when I moved to Ann Arbor, Michigan, that I there was a comic book store there called the Eye of Agamotto.
Yeah.
And I just went, you know, you could walk in and there's all this stuff and you're going, but yeah, I didn't have to, you know, rifle through to try to find some comic hidden in the back of the, you know, the new Fantastic Four or this or that. And, you know, there it was, you know, so, you know, I could go in there and you could just go boop, 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 boop. And then, and he says, well, if there's anything you want, we'll make a list and I'll pull it for you. And you're like, what? You know?
Well, I remember the comic buyers guy. I used to like read reviews. They'd be like, I got to check that out. I got to check this out. And there'd be independent comic stores. And if they didn't have it, they could order it for you.
Yeah. And the comics buyers guy was fun. And then you had, you know, Amazing Heroes. You had all those magazines that were coming out, Comics Interview, that were, you know, all comic book related. So, but then I think what happened too is like when I look at something like Wizard, when that came out, it really became, okay, here's what you know, if you buy this comic, it's going to be worth all this money. So it was no longer just like, okay, we have certain artists we're going to push and, you know, their sales went through the roof and other people they wouldn't even talk about. And it really wasn't a comic book magazine. It was more of like, for me, it was something that collectors would buy. And we all know what happened to the collector market. It went way up and then the bubble just went pop.
Yeah.
Because I had
after TMNT and they all jumped up and everybody was buying everything, including like Ninja Raccoons or whatever. And then, you know, they have horrible artwork and it wouldn't sell and they're stuck with all these copies. I know they bankrupted a lot of like independent comic stores.
Well, the other thing too that happened, and I know there was a Chicago comic book guy store, and you know what he did was he had a sale on Image books, and he had all those foil covers and all those different things and all that stuff because he had so much inventory. It was just on a pallet, and you could come in and pick out what you want, and he sold it to you by the pound, not by the issue. So I mean, that's the whole thing where people were going, oh, I've got a foil cover of X-Men number 22 or whatever, but I have 10 copies of it bagged, bordered in mint shape. So in 20 years, this is going to be worth a lot of money. And you're like going, no, because in 20 years, the 6,000 other people that did the same thing are going to have all those mint copies. And the reason that some of these comics that I read as a kid are so valuable to find them as a mint is because, you know, you'd fold them and put them in the back of your pocket.
Right.
We didn't have a collector mentality at that point. We were reading them. We traded them with friends. You sell them at garage sales. It was just a sort of way of getting entertainment that was inexpensive and you could just keep moving on and doing that, you know?
Yeah, you think about the value. I mean, how many copies are there of McFarlane's Spider-Man 1?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, 6 million copies. 20 years from now, I don't think there's going to be a really hard time finding one of those, you know? But when you think of like Superman, which, you know, during World War II,
like Action Comics 1.
Yeah. Where they had paper drives. So people were throwing in, you know, their comics and newspapers so that they could, you know, grind them up and reuse them to save paper. And yeah, there aren't many copies of some of that stuff around because they were in an environment which was we need to recycle all this.
It comes disposable. There was no like collector market. Like I remember, like I bought a Barry Windsor Smith Machine Man page back in the 90s. And like, I
Hmm.
loved his stuff. I thought a great version of Machine Man. And I always thought that was a way underrated character. And I remember it cost me $198, which was like a lot of money to me at the time. That same page, I just looked it up recently because I sold it, years and years ago when I really needed the money. This same page is $5,000.
Yeah.
I mean, it's worth it. He's an amazing artist, but it's like, holy shit, that collector market kicks in hardcore.
And a lot of that is what people want and what they think is valuable because, like you said, I mean, Barry has got a lot of credits and credentials, whereas his pages are going to jump in price. Whereas, someone like Bob Oscar, they're going to go, well, who's he? He drew Angel and Ape. There'll be a certain collection people
Right.
that are really into him and will really pay the money for it. And I'm
But it's
not
the
saying that
name, yeah.
either one is better, but like with Barry, he's been in that forefront. He's been shining in the front more. So yeah, I know what you're talking about because I bought in some stuff for like I'm older than you for like $50 that and it's like I'll put it this way because I think this is what my best friend said because I had to sell a bunch of artwork because we had a bad time too, and he just said, well, you don't really own that artwork. You kind of borrow it for a while. And then someone else gets to, have it. And then they sell it. And then, so they borrow it for that time. And it made it feel a little bit better, but I had to sell some pieces I really loved. And that's rough. But, on the other hand, I still have my studio and I can still make my art. So you have to look at it that way too.
Yeah, no, I've sold paintings I totally regret now. And I'm like, dude, I wish I didn't sell it. But yeah, I think there was a great quote on him. Have you seen that show, The Cabinet of Curiosities, the Del Toro thing
Yeah.
on
Hmm.
Netflix? He said a great quote where one of the guys has cancer and he tells his buddy, and he says, we're all on the same train. We just arrive at different times.
No, it's so true. And, it's like I said, I had to sell off some of my old comics and, I sold off my Daredevils and different things in number one. And, I mean, and then a friend said, well, do you have a copy of number one? And I said, I don't know if I got rid of that or what. And I went and looked and I said, no, I got rid of it. He said, number one is going for $5,000 right now, just like you said. And I'm thinking, boy, I got about $6,000 for all my comics. And now one of them would be worth that. Again, you never know because you think
Right.
about things like Beanie Babies, they did the boot and then
Well, you
so
also needed the money right there. So, like when
yeah.
I sold that Barry Winston Smith page, like the money I got back from it, I got what I paid for it basically. So that money was way more valuable than the price of that would be to me now. Like now, I'll be like, all right, go to my savings, okay. But at that point, I was like, I might starve to death.
Yeah. I mean, I know exactly what you're saying, and it's almost like almost every artist I've talked to has always had one of those kind of things. Now, there are also other artists who are brilliant and smart and good businessmen, and someone like Walt Simonson who's managed to always keep his finger on the pulse and always do some good stuff. I'm sure he didn't read it, but I'm on that. I always consider myself being on that fringe. I mean, here's comics, and I'm sort of like beep 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 beep. If it was the old atomic particle, there's the neutrons in the there, and I'm just like an electron that's sort of spinning around. You know, because I have been I'm all over the map with doing D&D stuff, doing book stuff.
Well, I'm
Um,
sure it's also whether you own the rights to the property or not, and how popular
yeah.
the property is. Like I know, like people like Alan Moore, like they still complain about like what DC did with the Watchmen and stuff like that, and how
Hmm.
they don't own the rights. And like I think Alan Moore made like some money after all, but not nearly what he would if he owned the complete rights to it.
Well, I mean, that's the one thing. Like I look at Kickstarters and I mean, I'm going to pick, this is the creme de la creme. There's Brandon Sanderson, who is made a lot of money for the book publishers. And then he went to do his own book and did it his own way on a Kickstarter. And he made like millions of dollars. But he's getting all of that. Whereas
Right.
when you think of Stephen King and you think of all those guys, you know, they're getting a percentage of the cover, and that can be anywhere from 10% down. So
Right.
on a $3 book, he's making 30 cents. Well, here's Sanderson
It's actually less than that because I sell books, and Amazon gives the publisher 35% of what they sell it for, and the
yeah,
publisher gives me a percentage of that 35%.
yeah. Well, that's the whole thing. People don't realize that. So, like, I always make it really easy. If the book costs $1, Amazon, you see, now I've heard, now you said 35, which is lower. Last time I dealt with them was 40% of cover. So out of that $1, they're only getting 40 cents. And then out of that 40 cents, they have to pay all their stuff. So if they give 10% to the artistic team, you know, that means they have 30% to pay for the publishing costs, and then they have to pay their overhead, their people, and all this and that. Now the thing is that you and I, as the creative individuals, are only getting that, percentage from one book.
Right.
If they're doing 50 books, their percentage,
It works out. Yeah.
it works out a lot better for them. But still, people don't realize that it's not like, they say, oh, this album sold 1 million copies. Well, yeah, but it's not 1 million copies at full price. But then, like you said, you've got to negotiate. You got to know what royalties are. You got to know if your page rate is in advance on royalties. There's a lot of stuff about the business of being an artist. And then
Yeah.
the other thing is,
You get
yeah,
tricked a lot too, especially as a creative person. You're not a business person per se. So, people
hmm
that are like experts at like, filling in all those little lines you don't read. And then, like, I remember hearing TLC, they were like the top selling band. They had 3 million albums sold. They were living with their parents and making no money.
well, that's that's the industry. And what people do to creatives is kind of frightening at times. And I've always said that as the artist, even in comic books and in other things, you're really the bottom of the food chain. You know, you're the last person. I mean, when I was working for most comic book companies, you turn in the work and you usually have to wait a month to get paid or sometimes longer. Well, how many people do you know would work as a secretary at a company and go in for work for a month for free and then, you know,
Yeah.
have to wait a month to get paid? So, I mean, it is really strange that way. And because that's the whole thing. Because, in other words, and then with me, if you're a freelancer, what most people don't realize is that you also have to pay your self-employment tax and that. So I always counted on it this way. I took a third of every paycheck I had and threw it in the bank, and I didn't touch it because that was for my quarterly taxes. So if I drew a 3-issue an arc for Marvel, one of those issues was drawn completely for Uncle Sam.
I
So
mean, that is smart. It's unfortunate it went down because Sam, so you can fight like wars that none of us approve of. But
yeah, well, that politics, when you get into politics, that's pretty much
losing game.
that's a maze of arguments that will just drive you to drink, and that's it. I mean, so I don't even want to go there, but it is the kind of thing that you really there's so much about the business of being an artist and what you do. And the one thing that I always told students when I was teaching is that comic books for me is the hardest way of making a living, because exactly what you said, which was earlier, that if you got a comic book, it's now 22 pages roughly. So that means if it takes you a day to pencil a page, in February, you only have 6 days off. So you have to be on key and you have to be working every day. And if you decide that you're going to do layouts for the full book and that takes you a week, well, you're already 4 days over.
Right.
So it's that kind of thing that you have to learn to produce what you can produce in the time frame that they're giving you, and be able to sort of keep that going. But that's I can't tell you holidays and Christmases I've missed because I'm working on deadlines and things like that. And working for books is a lot more different because you draw that character a couple times on the inside and that's it. But when you're telling a story, you got to take that character and you got to do ranges of emotion, different things, body languages, this, that. And,
I'll say with books, it's like a rough deadline. It's not like a
Mhm.
super tight deadline. I'm sure comics, especially if they're like a monthly comic, is a really tight deadline.
Yes. Well, you figure when it was like the penciler got a month, which is 4 weeks. The inker got 3 weeks. The colorist generally got a week, and the letterer got a week. And really, when you think of computer coloring now, I mean, I'll spend 2 days coloring a page, which is completely, if I was working in the industry, would be completely, that's it. I'd be off a book in 2 days.
Yeah,
But it's the kind of thing that, but then again, when you look at some of the other people and the other independent people, and someone who passed recently who I loved his work, which was Corbin, he always produced beautiful work. But when he went to Marvel or when he went to DC and did that, in a lot of cases, he just did the penciling and the inking and other people colored it. So he could do a schedule, and that gave him that sort of little gateway of like, I've drawn the Incredible Hulk, so now people will look at his other stuff. So I mean,
right,
again, it's all, every artist is going to tell you a different story about how they succeed or didn't succeed, or I was beaten by the company, I was not beaten by the company. And that's why you see a lot of artists moving around too.
right.
It used to be that, I mean,
Maybe the grass is greener on the other
mhm,
side. Yeah,
or they get, we'll give you a better page rate. I mean, when you really think about it, I've heard stories, and I don't know again how true they are, but Ditko left Marvel. He stopped drawing Doctor Strange and Spider-Man because he wasn't getting paid the royalties they said they were going to pay him. Kirby stayed because he, was really trying to support his family and doing that, and was, did a business sort of approach that way. And Wally Wood was doing all that work on Daredevil, which was brilliant, but they were not paying him either. So he went out and, started his own comic company, Tower, and did Thunder Agents, which was a wonderful book. But, it was at a time when the politics of the two big companies, DC and Marvel, could actually hurt you at the newsstand and things like that. So
would
they
they get
pulled up.
distributors not to carry you like a Diamond or whatever? They say don't carry this guy.
Well, Diamond and all that is a whole nother story, because remember when you had the big implosion of the distributors? Because when
Yeah,
I first did my own comic, there was like 15 different distributors, and then that all kind of blew up, and it was just Diamond. That's it. So yeah, a lot of people. I know that Kitchen Sink was sort of thrown out by Diamond, and I'm trying to remember who they were up in Madison, but they picked it up, and he was happy because he now went from being a secondary comic book producer to one of their main features at that distributor, because they weren't distributing Marvel and DC, so they were pushing other people. So again, it's I wish there was a really simple 1, 2, 3. There's so many values of grays and all this and all the different people that and how this has all happened. I mean, and you've talked to Steve, and he's got an incredible cadre of stories, because he's been in the industry and been in the heat of all of it and worked on incredible books with Moore and things like that. So he's felt both sides, the adulation and then the pressure from the companies to do more, get it done quicker, or this or that, because they're looking at you as a machine to produce a product. And that's always sort of a hard thing too, which the artist has to sometimes remember. You are producing a product. It's pretty much like if Ford was to say, well, we don't want to put any tires on the car this week because we don't feel like it. Not too many people would be happy with that.
yeah. Well, I think it was like in the late '80s and early '90s, like people were like taking more of like a chance with stuff. Like I remember T put out Taboo, and I didn't have a problem finding that, but that might have just been my experience. I don't know.
Well, I see, again, I was lucky that I had some of the stores that did carry it, and then because I knew Steve, and actually I did an illustration or two in one of the taboos, and you know, so I had a direct contact. So I was like, I need more copies, and then I got the whole set from him. I mean, I got them as they came out. So yeah, that's the other thing too. So that's why with the Kickstarter, if you've got an artist to me that you really like, support them on the Kickstarter, because that's what we're talking about right now. The more people that go out and find it and spread the word, there's going to be more of that around so people can get at it. I can't tell you how many times I've seen books that people own. I go, "Where'd you get that?" And they go, "It was a Kickstarter," and you're like, crap. But sometimes too, I know that some of the people doing Kickstarters also do what they call a, for the stores, for the people that own comic book stores, they give them a deal to buy, some of the issues and things. So some of the comic book stores are now picking up some of that stuff too. But then the comic book store says, well, I can't buy a lot of them because, this is a Kickstarter and all the people that would have bought that maybe came into my store have already bought it. So if I put it on the shelf, is it going to be a product that moves or will it be dead weight? So
I remember a lot of my early stuff I put in consignment.
Yeah. But I know that Terry Moore, who does Stranger Than Paradise, another good book, he does it all himself and publishes it, distributes it, and does that. And I know that Bedrock always is carrying his work because they love it and it always sells. So people are always finding it. So again, that's a good thing if you get a good store behind you too that pushes your work a little bit more and promotes your stuff. I mean, I had a signing recently at Bedrock. It was the best signing I'd had in the last 15 years. They're just a good store. They really, they tell their clients, they follow their clients and what they want. So you have their clients, which are, sometimes the superhero guys, the horror guys, this, that, whatever. And when you have a signing, and I've been to a couple of signings of other artists, you have an incredible collection of eclectic people coming through and looking at stuff. So it really is
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah. That's where I go, great. I mean, I hate the comic book stores where you go in where the guys are arguing who's stronger, the Thing or the Hulk. And if you ask them a question, they act like you're some sort of an idiot. And it's just like, oh,
elitism. Yeah. It's elitism. Yeah. Like hipster elitism. Yeah. All right. I don't want to keep you here all day, but I have one final question for you. So I remember, I mean, again, I'm old, but I remember like when they tried to license every property. There was like a ROM comic. There was like a kind of ROM was just like it was an action figure. They're trying to sell it, so they hired people to write up a backstory to it. But I remember there was like a Thundercats comic. There was like a G.I. Joe comic. There's a Star Wars comic. I mean, everything, all these licensed properties is really big that you got it across as a comic book story. Does that really happen nearly as much anymore?
That I would not be the best person to ask about that, but almost okay. G.I. Joe is still being done. Marvel, because it's owned by Disney, is producing the new Star Wars comics. Marvel owns 20th Century Fox, so they've just put out that Aliens omnibus. They put out the Predator omnibus. They're looking at licensed stuff to do, and the thing that I would say is as a business for those guys, it doesn't cost them anything except production to put those books out.
Right.
Because all the artwork is done, coloring, lettering, everything, so to put it all together and put out another Steranko book is not going to cost them anything but, publication and the design rights and things like that. So
what happened to ROM though?
I don't know, because I know a lot of people. I mean, Ditko drew some ROMs and he was inked by Paul Craig Russell. I mean, there was some absolutely brilliant, stuff going on there. But, like I said, I think that's also a thing too, is that when I say that, well, whatever happened to Blackhawk,
I remember that too.
Yeah, because
didn't Shaken do like a version of Blackhawk and like a 4-issue limited series? And in typical Shaken, it's like a lot more dark and florid and I enjoy his stuff though.
Yeah, but I mean, it is the kind of thing. Well, Howard has a very unique voice. Let's put it that way. He really does. And what he does incredibly well. But the thing that I was going to say is that it's just like anything else. You know, when I was a kid, you couldn't see all these great monsters and all this stuff. The movies were still, just starting with things. So comics was something I could really get into because it was easy, it was accessible, and
They
it
bring it
was
alive in the way that they
right,
couldn't with their technology at the time. Yeah.
right. And the comic was 10 cents, which, we can say, ooh, but at that time, when you're making $1.25 an hour, 10 cents is still, and now comics are $6 a piece, so you go in, you buy 3 comics and you're almost at $20. And I think the price of comics has jumped, so people don't have quite as much, entertainment spending cash. And then that entertainment spending cash is now being eaten up by you're buying a computer, all your software, headphones so I can talk to you, you know, um, and then you've got, just all this on top of it. You got DVDs, you got music, and then people are saying, well, now you're going to streaming, but you're still paying for your streaming services. So
Right.
the entertainment dollar has been stretched really hard. And to be honest, you hit the nail on the head. Society changes, sometimes like, I mean, whatever happened to kind of Freddie and Jason, they had a huge heyday and they were great as horror icons, but they're not as big as they used to be. Same thing with Aliens, same things with Predator. I mean, thank goodness that new Predator Prey movie was so much fun and done so well that it gave a little shot in the arm to the Predator license. Because again, I mean, it's just like, I don't know what a 20-year-old, when I was teaching, I had 20-year-olds in the class and I could, see what they were reading and what they were doing and everything else. But now, having gotten out of that and just sort of spending my time in my studio, I don't have a finger on that pulse. But, you know, it's just like movies too, where, all these movies they think are going to work bomb, and then these little independent things go through the roof. If we all knew what was going to sell and what was going to be the next hot thing.
Well, I think nobody knew that Guardians of the Galaxy would blow up the way it did. It's like
Yeah,
they're like
you're
B
right.
characters. Yeah.
And that was a whole thing too, because I'd heard a story that's they almost got shelved, and they weren't going to be released. And then they did release them. And then if you look at it, the first one is just, to me, a great barrel of fun and excitement, and everything.
No, I agree.
This,
Yeah, it was a good movie.
yeah. And the second one, you could just see that all the fingers were starting to get poked in the pie.
I
The
also
people
felt
that,
like that. Yeah.
yeah, that people had said, "Oh, I want to be part of this now," you know, and
Was it Ego the Living Planet a good guy originally and like the movie they made? I don't know. I just felt like it lagged. Like the first
yeah.
one had a spontaneity, like the first Deadpool, like the I'll just do what I want, you know.
Well, the thing about it too is that when you look at a character like Ego in the comics, he was a long running character. It wasn't like one issue and then he's
Right.
gone. We blow him up.
Yeah.
And he was a huge force in the universe. So yeah, I think they needed to, but once again, I don't know all the politics behind it. Whereas he could have written a story and then, you know, they're going to say, no, you got to do it this way. You got to do this. You got to know, blah, 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 blah. And there's always a back and forth, and I'm always amazed that sometimes that movies even get made. And especially when you look at like sometimes the making of things in back of DVDs now, I just go, wow,
Right.
because even when you look at some of these movies, you're saying, it was okay, but you look at what they had to go through to
Or
do
some of
what they
the
did.
horrible versions of like Faust, like Tim Vigil's Faust. I don't know if you saw that movie, but that movie was bad. Like I liked Tim Vigil's stuff, but that movie was bad.
It was definitely kind of well, I mean, the thing about it though is when you think of Tim's Faust, it's a raw graphic book,
Right.
and it's not for
Very raw,
everybody.
very graphic.
Yes, it's not for everybody, but it's like the same thing. Like I read an interview once with Zack Snyder who said he didn't like comic books, and I'm kind of like going, well, why are you directing comic book movies?
Right.
I mean, when you get somebody that really loves what they're doing, and that's why I was saying, like, I was lucky when the first Star Wars movie came out, I saw it in the theater. And it was just like, wow, you could just feel that there was, all this love that was put into this thing because the people that were working on it loved this stuff. Lucas did a phenomenal job. And then, then the politics hit when all of a sudden this unknown movie, which couldn't get distribution, gets it. And then it goes like, what? Then everybody had their finger in the pie. And then the Directors Guild is going, well, you can't direct any movies anymore because you put your credits at the end of the movie. So he got bounced out as a director.
I heard that.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and you're just
Last
going,
live's on them though, because
yeah,
look how big Star Wars was,
and that's the whole thing. But then, again, you've got all these people that are on the sidelines that can take you down or out or flatten your tires or doing, whatever they want to do. And that's their little thing. Because, it really is. It's an incredible franchise and how long it's lasted and what it's spawned and what it's done. So, but I always look at it this way too. I mean, Lucas was very lucky that he always had the best of the best working for him.
Right.
He really did. I mean, you look at people like Ian McCaig, Terrell Whitlatch, those guys just did incredible things for him, and Plug was working, or no, Ron Cobb, excuse me, worked on the first one too, and all these brilliant people doing great stuff that George could just, pick through and use. And so, Ralph McQuarrie doing all the Beginion stuff, which was just gorgeous. And yeah. So yeah, I mean, I'm just amazed that things keep moving and get done, And I know that like the director Jon Favreau that does The Mandalorian, he loved that stuff and he really loves Westerns, and he
you
put
can
his
tell.
love together. Yeah.
You can totally tell because it has that feel to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Where there's a lot of people they'll just grind it out. They want to direct it because it's going to shine light on them,
Yeah.
Because Favreau has done some really great movies, and I really like a lot of his movies. They're really wonderful.
Yeah, no, I really enjoy The Mandalorian. It was like the first time I felt like I'm with the old Star Wars is back. Like I remember seeing the originals in theaters being blown away. But all right. So how can people get a hold of you? How can they see what you're doing? How can they keep up with your latest projects?
Facebook or Instagram are the best things, and that's Grazing Dinosaur Press. And the website is also grazingdinosaurpress.com. And there is a little bookstore there that they can order some stuff. And there's also my email, which is there, and they can email me directly. And I can tell them more about what different things are going on. But I do tend to post on Facebook as Mark A. Nelson and Grazing Dinosaur Press. So I can't figure out how Facebook works sometimes, but sometimes people will send a friend request and boop, they're right in. Other times they'll get bounced around. They say he's got too many friends and this and that. So if that happens to you on the Facebook, Mark A. Nelson, just, punch following, send me a message, and then I can send a request. But,
Okay.
or you can just, like I say, or just Grazing Dinosaur Press.
Okay, awesome.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks for doing this.
No, it was a lot of fun, and I have to admit, I had a lot of fun watching you talking with old Steve Areno. So,
yeah, no, I think he enjoyed that too. I mean, I can't speak for him, but he seems to have enjoyed it. So that was a great thing. But yeah.
Oh no, I could tell he was having way too much fun. I wish I could have called up and interrupted and done things, but I didn't.
But yeah, anyway. Again, thank you very much, and I'll let you know when this is out. And we're trying to get with the other Mark, the writer of the Aliens project, so it'll be like one after the other. So hopefully,
fantastic!
Yeah,
because Mark is one of those people that has gone from comics to the movies to the TVs. He's a good writer, and he's a sharp businessman too. So that's what's nice. Alrighty.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And I'll send you a link when this is done.
Alrighty. Thank you.